Hello, there we are. Welcome at the virtual meetup. I'm Martijn van Dongen. I will be organizing today, hosting the event. We have a lot of speakers. I was just speaking to my colleague Kostas about landing zones, and he called out a couple of friends in the community who are also really active in the landing zone area. And everybody agreed here to speak. So we have a great lineup. Couple of things. We are live on Twitch and on YouTube, and both have a chat on the left and on the right side of the screen. So it's very interactive. I can immediately see your comments if you write something there. So please let me know which speaker you are here for, or which country you are viewing from. I see hello everyone, hello there. These kind of messages. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please type them there so we can have it as interactive as possible throughout the evening. I had a very awesome setup to interview Michel, who is sitting next to me, but the sound had a microphone failed. So I hope that we can hear each other, that you can hear us in the interview. The agenda for today: short welcome. Then first we will have a short conversation with Michel about why do you need a landing zone, just to set the stage. Then we will move on to Sunke. He will tell us all about the project Superwerker, where he's very active on, together with a couple of others in the community. Then we will move to Olaf, one of the Dutch fellows over here. He is working on org formation, also open source project. We will have a short break to stretch legs. And after the break, we will have Matt from AWS, who's telling us all about ALZ and the control tower. And finally, at the end of the session, we will have Kostas. Kostas will start with a live demo, which is recorded, so that we don't fail on the live demos, and then a whiteboard session to tell a little bit more about best practices working with landing zones. So let me see if I can zoom out a little bit and start with my first guest speaker. There we are. So I will keep the audio a bit between us, and also let me get my phone, because this is all I got. Our first guest, Michel Habits. Thanks for being here. Michel works for Enexis in various IT roles, and he played a key role when Enexis decided to move to the cloud. So I'm happy to be that Michel is here to share his thoughts on the landing zone, more for a big business perspective. So welcome, Michel.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I hope you get something useful out of it. Same for the community.
Michel, could you tell us a little bit more about Enexis?
Yeah. Enexis is a Dutch grid operator. So we manage the electricity and the gas networks in the southern part and the northern part of the Netherlands. We have about 2.8 million customers, 1.5 billion revenue, 5,500 employees, of which 1,000 are actually driving around in buses to extend and fix networking issues. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
So it's an energy company?
No, not an energy company. We don't trade energy. We only transport energy.
Transport energy.
Yeah. So okay. We're only responsible for the stuff that's in the ground and the meter in the home. But I mean, whatever you do with it is your
okay.
That's your game. You have to find a vendor that delivers the actual energy, and we only transport.
So you used to have a lot of data centers and computers internally? And
well, we had an outsourcing deal, so we already centralized quite a few of our IT. We don't have a lot of IT in our locations or in our offices. With the exception of the OT environment, the operational technology, those are completely separate. Those manage the electricity network mainly. They're on-premise, they're heavily shielded off, air-gapped and anything like that. But all the IT was already, to a large portion, centralized when we started this journey.
Okay, and so why did you choose to go to public cloud then?
Well, our main reason for moving to the cloud was to achieve business agility. So it was not really an IT kind of thing, but we had a new strategy, an access strategy a few years back, driven by the energy transition. And there are a lot of changes coming towards our company. I mean, what we used to do 100 years about the same, and then the last, say, 10 years, things are starting to change. Electricity delivery, decentralized electrification of society. So our company needs to change. We have to be able to adapt to new customer requests, new legislation, other market models. And at some point, somebody on the board said, well, we should be able to deliver any change within 3 months. And IT simply could not do that. I mean, a simple technical IT change would already take you 6 weeks. A firewall change, a new server could even take 2 or 3 months. And so if the business wants to make business change in 3 months, we actually had to do something drastic. So we not only started optimizing our processes, we just decided, well, we actually need to move to a cloud-native architecture, be able to use the benefits and the fast pace of changes in the public cloud, and use that to our benefits. For us, it was also not just a technical migration. The cloud is largely a technical kind of thing. But in order to actually get the benefits from it, we also made a change, or started to change towards an agile way of working, and actually DevOps organization, at least within IT. So the two are combined for us.
Okay, and when did the project start?
Well, we started with the definition of our vision, the cloud native architecture vision, at the end of 2016. We had to go to the politics, of course. The board of directors needed to approve the approach. We had to do a public tender to look for a partner. I mean, we are in the energy trade. We transport electricity. We don't have a large IT knowledge, and we played around a bit with public cloud, but we actually needed some help. So we did a public tender, acquired partners, and then in 2017 we actually started building our cloud platform. So the landing zone where all our IT should go to. And that was built 2017, early 2018. And when that was ready, we actually did the migration. So we moved all our applications from the outsourcing and a little bit on-premise to the public cloud. And we did that roughly in 10 months. So I think building it first and then setting it ready in the actual migration. And that was a lot of work. I mean, we have about 200 business applications, 800 VMs. So if you do the calculation, that's about 4 applications per week, every week. So it was actually quite an achievement. By the end of 2018, we had finished about 95% of the whole migration. And the 5% that were migrated were actually on the list of being phased out or moved to SaaS, something like that. So we didn't bother to invest in it.
Okay.
And then from 2019, we are running in the public cloud. Not hybrid, not private, not mixed, full public.
Full public cloud, but hybrid between AWS and Azure, right?
Yeah. We have a multi-cloud architecture, so we use AWS as well as Azure. That's also a complexity we had to facilitate in our platform.
All right. So 100% now is migrated, right? All the applications.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly from previous conversations, is that the tender was intended to first include a partner to migrate everything, but eventually take over the controls and do it on your own.
Yeah,
is that,
that's correct. I mean, the intention was to be more. I don't even the English word self-redzaam. Be on our own. You have the capabilities to actually manage it as well, because we had the experience that when you fully outsource, you always have to ask somebody else to do something for you. And that's a handover. Handovers are delays, miscommunication, so then you lose time. And if you want to make speed, to want to be able to deliver business functionality within a day, you have to be at the driving seat yourself. So we searched for a partner that could first help us build the cloud, but also could train us and assist us in getting the knowledge, getting the hands-on experience to manage it and to bring it one step further.
Okay.
So yeah, based on that, we formed a cloud platform team. So that's actually the team I was product owner for. And we are now continuously developing that cloud platform.
Yeah. And how is the balance between the partners and doing it on your own right now?
Well, we started about, I think, 25% of us. Well, actually more, because we had one employee when we started. So we had one team member and me. So I'm the architect and the PO. And we had one team member on day one that actually started with it. We quickly go to 3, so it was 3 of an Nexus and 6 or 7 of the partner. And that's now actually shifting. So we now have 6 of our own. We have some vacancies, so we want to grow to 9. And then also product owner. But we still keep the partner on board. We've seen that it's almost impossible for such a team, even how knowledgeable, how good our engineers are. I mean, we have very, very good people. But it's almost impossible for the 2 clouds to stay on track with all the changes, all the new services. So we need the innovation power of that partner to help us progressing, because you have to move forward, always move forward.
Nice. Hey, and you mentioned already the landing zone. So it's a term where I think it's one term with 1,000 definitions.
Yeah.
But from your point of view, what is a landing zone and what does it include?
Well, for us, a landing zone, I mean, of course, we have the AWS accounts, we have the VPCs, we have the direct connection of the technical stuff. But that's not the landing zone we want to offer to our DevOps teams. We're not an IT company. We have DevOps teams, but they have limited hardcore technical skills. So we want to provide them with a landing zone that makes things easy for them, that they can easily deploy functionality, because that's what they're there for, help the business. And we take away that complexity. So we have the concept of landing zones we built is actually one that includes the technical infrastructure, the technical layout, the networks, but also the DevOps tools, the code repositories, the CSD pipelines that does things for them. We provide a centralized backup facility, so they don't have to worry about setting up a backup facility. We include that as a service to them. And that whole concept, all those components are part of that. On top of that, we created a concept we call stacks. So what we don't want is that DevOps team A does something disastrous that is a jeopardy for the application of DevOps team B. So all our applications are in stacks, and a stack is sort of a security boundary. Within a stack, you can do whatever you want, but you cannot go outside the responsibility of that stack. So in all our tools, we brought that forward. So in all our tools, we have separate code repositories for every stack, and they can all manage that themselves. And from a center perspective, we manage the pipeline that triggers on that code repository, so that does the actual deployment in the cloud.
Okay.
So teams mainly have to worry about plugging in their code in the landing zone we provide, do the merge of the code, and then we assure that it's properly handled, that we do some lint test build, actually built by your colleague for a large portion. Costas helped us with that. So that what we deploy adheres to our security standards, naming conventions, enforces encryption, that kind of stuff. So that we help teams with doing it right.
Yeah. And well, you already answered it a little bit, but is it a single repository that you can download, press enter, and a couple of days later your landing zone is running? Or
that would have been nice, wouldn't it? No, it's not. We have a process, or actually it's a Python program that we call the Bootstrapper, and that by itself is a single kind of thing, but it does a lot. It assures that the AWS accounts are created. It assures that GitLab repos are created, permissions are granted. It creates Active Directory OUs and sets the GPOs. So it does a lot of things in a lot of places, and you can copy that, but it doesn't say that it works for you. I mean, it was for a large part built for our needs. We needed something for our DevOps teams in the scope we gave them. We want them to be 100% self-sustainable. that they don't need us to deploy anything or to change anything, so they can make speed. But if you organize it different in your own company, you need to do it in another way.
Okay, but a part of it is already open source, or?
Yeah. We kind of like open source, so we use a few open source products in our cloud platform. HashiCorp, Vault, Terraform, Cachette, and some other stuff. We use open source products in our pipelines. Flux, Flatpan, recently Canico. So we had one of our engineers explore the Canico, so we now built our Docker images in a secure way. But the Python code we created ourselves. We created Python libraries, and those Python libraries are open source through Shoebake Phyllis.
Okay.
So anybody can use them and hopefully contribute to them, and then we can use them again, so we can all make them better.
Well, sounds great.
Yeah.
That's actually the questions I prepared. I see we have some time left, so I was wondering if we do have some questions. I see my colleague nodding, so let me see. This one already is answered. So here's the question, have you looked at AWS landing zones, and why haven't you choose to use that? Well, it's just 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah. When we started 4 years ago, it didn't exist. So that's the easy question. But what we started with 4 years ago, we now call AWS legacy. Because in our entire landing zone, we have AWS actually in two concepts. We have what we call AWS legacy already, and we have AWS multi-account structure. And for that, we actually do use the AWS landing zones. So we do use Control Tower to set up that AWS part of it. So we have the centralized auditing account, we have the org structure. And every new application that we deploy, every new stack that we create more AWS accounts in that structure with standardized SCPs and anything related to that. And in total, we now have about 170 AWS accounts in that structure. So the AWS, the legacy, well, we move the accounts, but not really part of it. So over time, we actually want to move those applications to the new structure. So the AWS landing zone is underpinning of the Nexus landing zone, because we needed more than just the technicalities. We needed also the setup in the tools and the CSD pipelines for the team.
And is it so are there two landing zones and you decide which one you use, or is it a single landing zone that is continuously evolving?
Well, we presented to our teams as a single landing zone, but when they want to onboard a new application and they want a new stack created, we actually do ask them the questions: do you want it in a multi-account, do you want a legacy stack, or do you want to use Azure? I mean, that's also an option. So at creation of a new stack, it's relevant. After that, it's no longer actually an issue. They can deploy wherever they want.
Okay, cool. Let me check if there's another question. This is a very long one, so let me just read it and then decide if you're going to answer it. Yeah. Does this mean that your developers don't have access to infrastructure, and that the centralized team is responsible for all CI/CD pipelines and infrastructure management? And how do you keep this scalable?
There's a lot of questions in one. The centralized team manages the CI/CD pipeline. We provide them with a pipeline that deploys their code. But they have to manage their infrastructure code. I mean, they know what they need. So they create the Terraform plan. They put it through a standardized mechanism, the code, and if they merge it or if they tag it, then the pipeline picks up that code and deploys it to the cloud. I'll give nobody access to the AWS console. It is as code or not. So everything is in code. The pipeline deploys it, but when it's deployed, they are responsible for it. So if they deploy VMs, the centralized team doesn't manage that VM. We only manage the provisioning of that VM. So if I don't care what they do with it, they're responsible. We like the concept of micro-segmenting. That's why if you need a new application, you get multiple AWS accounts. You get one for test, acceptance, production. So there's actually separate AWS accounts. we do it on a networking level, so everything is contained within security groups. So that's also their responsibility. The only thing that we also do centrally is managing or vetting actually of the security group rules. So if they want to open port 80 to the internet, I mean, they can write the code, they can upload the code, but we as centralized team does a review of that security group change. And if we approve it, then it's executed. Okay. And the main reason for that is that, well, our auditors and the security officers do like the concept of a single entity having view on all the firewall changes, and to avoid that we get a lot of any rules and lateral movement through our environment because of mistakes from teams. But we don't manage their infrastructure. I mean, I provide them the ability to deploy it or to delete it or to change it.
Yeah. Cool. I hope that it answered at least one of your questions.
Part of it.
Also saw another one coming in, and it was not named yet. Which CI/CD tool is in use?
We use GitLab CI. Yeah, GitLab is where we put code. We have multiple repositories, multiple groups and projects. They can also define their own if they need to. And GitLab CI capabilities of that are being used for the pipeline.
Okay.
For the majority. We also use some CloudFormation SAM, specifically for serverless deployments.
Okay. And that GitLab, is that hosted in the landing zone as well? Or is it?
It is part of the landing zone. I mean, the concept, we use multiple components. Some of the components we actually buy from vendors or as SaaS. It's configured for us to act as part of the whole. And GitLab is something that we buy in. So yes, it is part of the landing zone because we provide default repositories for teams.
Yeah.
But the product itself is not. We don't host it ourselves. We just buy.
Cool. Thanks. Maybe last question. Do you use a shared VPC or transit gateway to allow cross-account network access?
Yes and yes. Yeah. We have a transit gateway, we have direct connect. Dual have high redundant, so that comes into a transit gateway. From the transit gateway, we have a test acceptance production services VPC, and all the other AWS accounts use that shared VPC.
Okay.
So yeah, because we've initially researched putting a VPC in every AWS account, but if you have then hundreds of AWS accounts, you have hundreds of VPCs, and you start becoming very complex very fast. Also costing a lot of money very fast. So we tried that initially when we were experimenting with it, and then decided that we would go for the shared VPC.
Yeah, well, because if I remember correctly, transit gateway wasn't even there 4 years ago.
No, when we started it wasn't. No, that's why we have AWS Legacy.
Yeah.
And then when it came along, I think that about 2.5 years ago, then also I think it was announced in Vegas, the transit gateway, and then when people came back from Vegas, we thought, well, this is going to fix something for us. So we started working with it.
Yeah. Cool.
That's what, by the way, that's also something, it's never finished. Managers always ask, when are you done? Well, never. Yeah. Things are constantly changing. Clouds is changed, new products come in, new services come in. And we really want to stay at the forefront of those developments. That's why we did it in the first place. Yeah. I think more than 50% of what we started with 4 years ago has already been changed. Different tools, different setups. Yeah. So that's why we have a team that actually does it.
Cool. Final question for me. You started with the politics. They have to decide to move to the cloud. Are they happy now with the movement? Because probably they are interested in the results.
I actually think they don't even appreciate how good we are.
Okay.
I mean, if I talk to people outside of the company that are more experienced with it, and they view what we've done, they actually think, well, that's not too bad, not too shabby. You do it in this complexity within a year. You migrate it. You're in control. You know what you can do. You can make infrastructure changes within 5 minutes if needed. Yeah. So we can do a lot. And then internal company managers don't always see that as a benefit. They're getting used to it. Yeah. In the past, it took them 6 weeks for a firewall change. Now it takes them 5 minutes, and they still ask, why does it take 5 minutes? Come on. So yeah. But I think what we set out to do, at least the technical perspective, we actually fully achieved. We can make speed. IT is not the choke point. hardcore IT. No, I'm not saying the more the functional information management or information analysis. That's more going back forward to business. But the real hardcore IT part, I mean, I think that's fantastic what we can do.
Cool.
I'm very proud of it, and I know that the team is also very proud.
Nice. Hey, thanks for opening this this meetup.
No
we will move to the next speaker in a minute. If you still have questions, I believe Michel will be around for a little bit more, so I can take them offline. Maybe make sure that he can supply an answer using the chat as well.
Yeah.
So again,
and if somebody, people are interested in getting more details, you know where to find me. You can reach out, and we can always discuss further.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, you were still looking for some AWS engineering.
I mean, we're still looking for engineers, especially if they're female. You know, a bit more diversity in the team would be nice. But any good engineer that wants to work at a fantastic company.
In which place in the Netherlands?
Well, the head office is in Den Bosch, but we also have Zwolle and Weert as
remote
IT
nowadays.
And now it's all remote.
Yeah.
Now it can all be done remote. But we do like to see people in the office once in a while, if it's possible again after Corona. Yeah, it's good for the team.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. I hope that everybody was able to understand everything. I have very cool microphones all over, but well, things fail, and we are still a meetup group, so we have to do it with the gear we have. Next speaker on the agenda is Soenke, who will tell us all about Superwerker, the open source jumpstart to a well-architected AWS setup. Welcome, Soenke.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks. Thanks for having me. Really cool to be here. So yeah, there's already the screen, so this works. Shall we start right ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
That's cool. Okay, so today I want to talk about Superwerker, which is an open source jumpstart to a well-architected AWS setup. Many buzzwords, so let's see what's this all about. So let me first start with a little bit of a problem statement. So the AWS cloud promises faster time to market, and in usual public clouds do this. So in theory, it's a little bit like you have an idea, you create an AWS account, and then you can start building and be happy with your 200 plus services. But in reality, from our experience, it looks a little bit different because there are many questions. For example, how does in AWS this multi-account thingy even work? Which foundational services should be enabled? How can I ensure that my AWS setup is secure? How can I keep my costs under control? How can I detect incidents and events and handle them? And last but not least, how can I keep up to date with the pace of AWS? So building an AWS foundation, from my experience, usually ends up with paying consultants, somehow custom building it in-house, or simply doing nothing. So starting right ahead with using the building blocks, but doing nothing for the AWS foundation. I think there are some problems with this approach. So first, this might be expensive. So consultants are expensive. In-house people have to be trained if there are any, or they learn it by trial and error, which usually leads to time to AWS slowed down. So usually for a customer, a new AWS customer, all this landing zone thingy is more or less undifferentiated heavy lifting. They usually don't care. They just want to get their workloads into AWS. And so this time to the real work is delayed. Best practices might not be known, so inexperience might lead to best practices not followed because they are not known. And last but not least, maybe even basic services are not enabled because AWS is like a toolkit of so many services, but when you start with it, it's easy to overlook basic things. So what we did is we created the Superwerker open source solution, which actually really automates everything, the setup of an AWS cloud foundation with prescriptive best practices, and it enables startups and small and medium businesses to focus on their core business by saving them a lot of setup and maintenance time and money. So this doesn't mean that it's not only that, so you can also use it as an enterprise, but our, let's say, main focus is startups and small and medium-sized businesses. So now let's have a look what's in the package. So Superwerker enables the following AWS services and features in a completely fully automated way. So first of all, we have Control Tower as the base for a future-proof multi-account setup. We enable Security Hub to ensure established security standards. We also enable guard duty through the entire organization for the detection of possible threats and breaches. Resources are automatically backed up. With AWS Backup, we create an initial budget alarm. We also protect the infrastructure with more preventive guardrails, with SCPs. And we have a living documentation which provides guidance, next steps, and standard operating procedures. More of that in a minute. We use the Systems Manager Ops Center for notifications and incident response. And last but not least, we provide a way for secure AWS account mailboxes. More of that also in a minute. So, and what are the main benefits of this? So first of all, you get a really off-the-shelf AWS experience. It's a fully automated setup. You get a secure AWS environment in hours instead of weeks. So usually this takes 2 hours to install, mostly waiting for DNS or Control Tower setting up. Superwerker is an official AWS Quick Start. It's free and open source, and it's a bundled and codified experience of 2 AWS Advanced partners. So they're really, like, let's say, decades of experience in it, and everything is codified. So no manual ClickOps, and we have to be compliant to COVID. So now it's like this. Okay, so let me go through a few highlights of Superwerker. I think so the first highlight I want to show you is our living documentation. So this is actually an auto-generated and updated CloudWatch dashboard. It shows, for example, next steps after the setup. So for example, usually you want to wire your the AWS SSO setup to your existing identity provider, let's say Google or Okta or Azure AD. Then we also have standard operating procedures, for example, creating a new AWS account through the Control Tower account factory, or checking the Ops Center for incoming events and messages. And yeah, so this is just the start. This is our first iteration of the dashboard, so more to come. Let me show you another highlight of Superwerker, which is that Superwerker hides the complexity of AWS root email inboxes. So as you all know, or as you might know, is that each AWS account needs a unique email address, which might be a mess in a multi-account setup with many accounts. So, and by default, Without MFA, access to this email inbox also grants access to the AWS accounts, because you could do an password reset, and then you are an administrator within the account. And Superwerker actually protects users from this threat, because what we do is during the installation, the user has to provide a DNS subdomain. So for example, AWS.mycompany.com. Then and this will be delegated to Superwerker. Superwerker now can generate random email addresses for each sub-account. And incoming emails to this domain are now routed through AWS, through the SES incoming email feature. They are scanned for spam and viruses, and then they create an ops item in the SSM Ops Center, and it looks like this. So then you get an email as a ticket, and you can set the status and so on. It's like a small ticketing system within AWS. So now let's get a little bit more into the machine room of Superwerker. Let me have a few words about the design guidelines. So how do we design Superwerker? First of all, we have real end-to-end tests. So we are testing with real AWS accounts and resources. So we are sure that our solution works in the real world, in real AWS accounts. We roll out control tower, guard duty, and so on at each test run. We document all of our decisions, or most of them, hopefully all of them, with architecture decision records, so with RDRs. We tend to have a really low total cost of ownership. We only use serverless AWS services, like we start with CloudFormation, then there's a little bit of Lambda, systems manager automation, event bridge, and so on. But no servers or containers are harmed. And last but not least, we want to be forward compatible and adopt to the future. So as soon as AWS releases the feature or service which makes part of Superwerker obsolete, which is very likely, and we hope so, we will adopt. So in an ideal world, the Superwerker project would not have to exist. So this is really our stated goal, that we are only like bridging the gap between what we want AWS, or let's say control tower, hint, hint, to be like, so that we don't have to build our own solution. Let me show you one highlight of how we test Superwerker. So, which I'm especially proud of. So as I mentioned, we are testing with real AWS accounts and resources. So we make sure that there are no breaking changes, or that it's always installable in AWS accounts. So, and as you might know, to fully test control tower and AWS organization setup, we need AWS management accounts which are not part of any organization, and there is no API for this to create new AWS management accounts. So, and we found we started with our pipeline in one region and one static account, but we saw that there are problems with static AWS management accounts for testing. So a few of them. First, cleaning up an entire organization is nearly impossible. So for example, control tower, cleaning up everything control tower sets up is very much, even after the decommissioning feature, it's still an entire or many pages of documentation. It creates sub-accounts and so on. So we are not so we did not find a tool which is capable of really cleaning up an entire organization. This leads to errors which are hidden in greenfield. So for example, something might have already enabled some feature in some service which led to something working in a subsequent test run, but not when you start with a fresh AWS account. We also stumbled upon weird errors like the guard duty from the guard duty team blocked our pipeline because once we had it that we got an email from the guard duty team that they could not, they blocked the access to the guard duty APIs because we toggled the organizational access too fast and they didn't like it. And then our pipeline was blocked for, let's say, I don't know, 1 or 2 weeks. And last but not least, we also want to have metrics tests. So we want to be able, for example, to test in multiple dimensions, multiple regions. And this is also very hard with only 1 or 2 or 3 accounts. So these are problems with setting AWS management accounts for testing. So what we did is we created the management account vending machine for disposable AWS management accounts. So, and first, I really want to thank again Ian McKay. You probably know him in the AWS universe. So we are standing on his shoulders and his AWS account controller, which we could steal many code parts from, which is really cool. So how does this management account vending machine work? Really short. We use browser automation, and actually we use CloudWatch synthetic canaries currently for this, which is like a runtime for Puppeteer. And there is no logo yet, so I use this logo. And we create, with this, we create AWS management accounts with browser automation, and we do all of the stuff which has to be made to create it. We store this information or these accounts in a DynamoDB table. That's like the stock of available AWS accounts. Then we have an API endpoint and users, for example, our pipeline, which we see in a minute, can vend AWS accounts, so management accounts, standalone accounts, and the response looks like this. So we can we do the curl and we get back an account ID and we get back a cross account role. And now if you are authorized for this role, you can assume it and then you can do stuff in this account. Yeah, so we retrieve it from the stock, and once it's retrieved from the stock, there's a trigger. I think it's a DynamoDB trigger. It triggers the step function. The step function waits 24 hours and then closes the management account. Again, it also sets some stuff like billing information, tax inheritance, and so on. Yeah, and it's a CDK project, and you can find it as a sub-project in our organization. So it's at github.com/superwerker/maven, not Maven, but MAVM. So let's have a look how we integrated this in our pipeline. So the pipeline starts as usually any pipeline does with a commit or push to the main branch. We then start a code build job, and it's a batch job. It's actually a metrics job because we then have a dimension for the regions. So we test in 2 regions because we want to make sure it's a little bit like a smoke test that we can install Superwerker in several regions. So we could easily append more regions here, but we use these because, yeah, so we are from Germany, so most of our customers use the Frankfurt or the island region, but there's no other reason for it. Then we use our management account vending machine. We get 2 fresh accounts for each test run, or for each pipeline run. Then we install, as the customer also would do, the CloudFormation template. And then we run our test suite, which runs mostly integration tests, like end-to-end integration tests. And after that, the sub-accounts will be closed also automatically, because like Control Tower creates 2 sub-accounts. We also create one through the account factory, so that we are sure that this also works. And as I said, after 24 hours, the management account vending machine will close the management account again. We are also working on pull request tests, so that we use the same infrastructure also for pull request tests, so we can be always sure that a pull request did not break anything. Okay, so that's so last but not least, Superwerker is a joint venture of 2 AWS Advanced Consulting partners, Kreuzwerker and Superlumina. So on the Kreuzwerker side, there's Jörn. He's the co-founder of Kreuzwerker. He's today not here. The other one is me, and I'm the co-founder of Superlumina. You can find me on Twitter and GitHub there, as you see, and you can also write emails if you like. And actually, that's all I got. Here are all the links. There is a GitHub. There's architecture decision records. There's the AWS Quick Start, as I mentioned. We are also an official AWS Quick Start. There's a link to the management account vending machine. We have a Google group. We also have a Slack channel and special requests. So if you are finding this interesting, maybe also as an AWS partner, or you want a cooperation or alliance or commercial support, you can also write an email to info@superwerker.cloud. And now I have 3 seconds left. 1, 0.
Nice. Actually, we have 12 minutes left. So, and I saw a couple of questions. So, if you're open for some questions, then,
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of them are maybe already answered in your talk, but maybe just to highlight them a little bit. This one wasn't covered yet. So does Superwerker offer support for creating a shared VPC and sharing it between child accounts?
Not yet. So we did not make it, let's say, to the network or workload level yet. So in the first release, we really we focused on having like the baseline for it. But there's at least I think there's at least a GitHub issue which has some plans for a, let's say, networking account or something like that, which should provide a networking account. But currently there isn't, no.
Okay, thanks. And the other one was also maybe already discussed, but maybe just to highlight again, is Superwerker upgradable over time?
Yes, it is, and it always should be. And we also plan to have this in our test suite, so that we test, for example, the last 2 versions to be upgraded to the next version, so that we are also sure that nothing breaks.
Cool. Another one. What are some of the big items on your roadmap?
That's a really good question, because currently we're more or less in a, like, let's say, stabilizing phase, and we want to spread the word phase. So currently I'm afraid to say that we have many tickets and ideas, like this networking account, like, let's say, for example, synchronizing Security Hub to the Ops Center and stuff like that. But there's nothing which I could say now this is really on the roadmap, because currently we are focusing on the test infrastructure, the release infrastructure, and so on. So as I said, we are now building pull request tests. We are now building an automated release process, and so on, so that we have a foundation to then start again with the features. But currently, we have a little bit of a, let's say, feature break, and we are focusing on getting the word out and also focusing on development, release, updates, testing, and so on.
Cool, thanks. I don't see any other questions, but if you still have one, there's still some time, so please write them in the chat. One question from my side, actually.
Yes.
I know there are a lot of initiatives of open sourcing landing zones or open sourcing tools. Are there other tools that you also like, but are comparable in a different level? Or
yes.
Can you do?
Yeah. I think that so with Superwerker we really try to focus on let's say startups and SMBs who don't have their own ops or cloud center of excellence or DevOps team. So to give them a quick start into the cloud, into the AWS cloud, where they are still secure, and we use this in our own consulting gigs. So let's say we say, okay, before we start, we have to install Superwerker, and you save a lot of money with this, because otherwise this would take consultants, I don't know, several weeks to install, and this would cost you several 10,000 euros probably, depending on the rate of the consultant and the speed of the consultant. And I would say we are not in direct, so you cannot really compare it to let's say, for example, org formation or something like that, which we will see, I think, after me. So because we always build on top of stuff. So we build, for example, now we build on top of Control Tower, which builds on top of many AWS services. And yeah, it was really the goal to have this easy and to have the, like, let's say, not so much custom code, but so actually Superwerker is more or less gluing stuff together and having some feature flags currently. So it's actually, when you look at it, it's some CloudFormation templates, and it's very simple. It has some funny hacks like the Puppeteer stuff, but yeah, it's simple, and currently it has opinions in it. So we try to bundle opinions, and with something like landing zone or org formation, you can control everything, and we say no. You don't. We don't allow you to control everything, because we say this is the correct solution, and it works in, like, let's say 90% of the cases. And if you are one of the 10%, because you have very special stuff, or you have a DevOps team which has much time to do custom stuff, or you have someone has really or you are a big enterprise and you're moving to the cloud and you have like a big legacy network, then it might not be the best solution, but you could still start with it. It's open source. You could adopt it and then start from it.
Cool. Are you aware of how many customers or implementations are used by Superwerker?
Yes, but I don't know if so that I know that there is a secret CloudFormation API which only the Quick Starts team knows. But I think it's about 100 installations or so. So we don't track it, but they track it. So yeah. So, and we have already, like, let's say, a couple of open source users who were brave and installed it themselves, which was really cool. And yeah, so, but we are also, let's say, looking for others who want to use this maybe for their customers. So maybe other AWS partners who are not experts, let's say, in setting up landing zones, but more experts in, I don't know, AI, ML, or any other, like, more workload related stuff. So if you are interested in that, we will be really happy to talk. And we are currently also preparing a workshop, which is also open source, then you can do like self-paced labs with this. Yes.
Nice, thanks. There was one final question I would like to show you. This one. Can we also extend Superworker with custom CloudFormation stack sets, or how would that work?
Yes, you can, because it wouldn't interfere with it. But there's so you could, for example, install the customizations for Control Tower. There's this customizations for Control Tower GitHub project. You could use this to install the stack set. So we don't just we roll out, I guess, one stack set by ourselves, but otherwise we don't interfere with existing or with added stuff. So we try to keep it separate.
Nice, thanks. I saw there were a couple of other questions. I hope that you can stay here for a couple of more minutes, maybe
Yes.
to answer them in the chat.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. It looks awesome. And let me also add Olaf to the stream. There he is. Because you already said, do we have competition? Well, maybe org worker, but it has a different view. So this is the opportunity to fight. And Olaf already shared, I hear shots fired on the background. I think it was maybe a mic thingy on your side, Soenke. But
I heard that org formation was for the special people, not?
For the nerds, yes.
Yeah, I'm completely fine with that. Luckily, sounds like a great solution. By the way, it sounds like something that would be useful for indeed like a lot of people. And staying close to
Yeah.
AWS and building on top of AWS services definitely has a huge benefit to it.
Yeah, I really think it's different target groups. So there's no real competition, because it's really a different target group which we are targeting there, and that's okay.
I imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again, Soenke.
Yeah.
Hopefully we see you soon in another meetup.
Yes, hopefully. Really cool. Thanks again for having me, and I wish you very much fun, Olaf, and I'm really eager to learn more about org formation.
Great. I'm setting up my screen. I think I'm gonna. So while I'm presenting, I'm not going to be able to see any of the chat messages. But Martijn, please, if there's something that requires my attention, just shout out, and
Sure.
And I will answer it. I assume that everybody can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep,
So thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. So this is about managing your AWS organization using org formation. My name is Olaf Konijn, and I work over at Steady as a serverless engineer. Now, about org formation. Org formation is a CLI tool that has been under active development for quite a number of years now. Initially, it was designed as an internal tool for the company that I used to work with, but by now has created quite some traction in the open source community. I'm still amazed by people actually knowing the tool and calling it out or referring to me as, oh, he's that guy that created org formation. But yeah, there's a lot more people involved now. People are coming up with their own features, creating pull requests, hearing crazy stories about how it's being used. Like it really started to live its own life, and that's awesome. To go back to the initial use case, I used to work over at a small retail bank that was transitioning to AWS serverless, and I was working with the infrastructure team that was tasked and responsible for managing all the AWS accounts, the compliance of all the AWS accounts and the workloads, and the IT security that we required all those accounts to have. Now, being a small team and starting to build this platform, designing this platform, we early on ran into two insights that were key in why we built org formation. The first insight was multi-account will greatly simplify anything we have to do in terms of IT security and compliance. It will limit blast radius and do a lot for data governance. And the other insight we had is that everything we did, being a small team, had to be defined as infrastructure as code. Otherwise, we would just have an increasing backlog of tasks that we would have to deal with. So this is a slide around multi-account benefits, of which I assume most of you to be fairly familiar with. The more interesting thing to talk about is perhaps infrastructure as code. People will tell you, automate everything. And we did. But we wanted to take this a step further. We wanted not just to automate everything with scripts that would transition infrastructure here to there, or from state A to state B. We wanted everything we did to be defined in a declarative desired state model. And this has a couple of benefits. One, you are able to put it in a Git repository where people would be able to download a copy, look at the version history. You would have the entirety of your AWS platform auditable in source code at any point in time. The other, well, perhaps somewhat obvious benefit is that we would be able to evolve the infrastructure and the platform that we were building, creating PRs, then testing the changes, linting it, guarding it, approving it, fussing around pull requests, or disapproving it, and then deploy changes to our infrastructure as many times a day as we wanted to. We even went a little bit further. We actually felt that failure of being able to define parts of our platform as infrastructure as code, which means like stuff that we weren't able to manage from Git, that we then had to compensate by writing a script or logging in manually, would take away a lot of the benefit that we were creating. Like imagine having a workload in your production AWS account and managing it over CloudFormation. Having somebody that logs in and changes even the tiniest bits of what you have being managed by CloudFormation will create drift, will make future deployments less reliable, and will take away from the auditability of what you're managing in production. So we effectively said that idea of managing our infrastructure as codes that people do with their workloads, with their Lambdas and their DynamoDBs and their VPCs, we want to apply that to the entire AWS organization. And that is what CloudFormation is. It is infrastructure as code applied to the entire AWS organization. Now, what about CloudFormation? CloudFormation is great. It's a wonderful tool. I've got to know it. I've got to love it. Every once in a while, I get to be slightly frustrated with it. But the way that CloudFormation, or the reason CloudFormation is not sufficient for this task, is any CloudFormation template you execute and you describe resources in, you are constrained by the bounds of your account. Yes, you can use stack sets to deploy templates to multiple accounts at the same time. But the vocabulary you have, the expressiveness that you have, would never or would not allow you to describe a relationship from one resource in account A to another resource in account B. And if you are relying on a multi-account AWS setup, and you're managing the infrastructure that needs to ensure the compliance and the IT security controls, then that ends up being a big part of what you would like to be able to describe. How one account relates to the other, least privilege, what can one account do to the other. And CloudFormation doesn't have the vocabulary or the primitives to be able to describe those relationships or to model that infrastructure. Now, org formation has the notion of templates, and even more so, and also heavily relies on CloudFormation. Any CloudFormation template is a valid org formation template. Org formation just adds syntax on top of CloudFormation. And you can think of it in the same way you might think about TypeScript and JavaScript. JavaScript is a great programming language. It runs pretty much everywhere. There might be things that you are not able to express fully in JavaScript. So what does TypeScript do? It provides you with additional syntax and ultimately transpiles into JavaScript before it gets executed. That's exactly what org formation does. Org formation, and we will look at a project a bit later on, but org formation will look at your project, and when deploying out of the pipeline, it will generate CloudFormation files based on the org formation syntax that you have. And then these files will be executed as CloudFormation stacks, just like any other solution would. So what does org formation or working with org formation look like? You typically would start with a organization.yaml file. The organization.yaml file is a CloudFormation-like file. It's a declarative desired state model in which you describe all your AWS organization resources. I'm still very much hoping for AWS to launch CloudFormation for AWS organizations. But until that, this is, I think, the best there is. This file allows you in a organization attribute, which you can see on line 1, specify your organization resources that then will be available to any other file or any other template within your org formation project. So if you look at the bottom of the file, what you see is there's an account in this AWS organization, and I can, by adding to this file, I can add more accounts. I can take accounts out of this file that won't get deleted, but they will be stopped being managed by org formation. I'm able to take my account and add it to a organizational unit. The organizational unit can be nested in another organizational unit, or otherwise would be underneath the organization root. And I'm able to apply service control policies to my AWS organization structure. And whenever I make modifications to this file, I check it in, I create a pull request, it gets approved. And once it gets approved, the org formation tool will run updates or perform tasks if you are using multiple tasks. And it will ensure that the physical AWS resources will match what my desired state describes. The other thing this allows you to do is add tags to accounts. So that's also possible in AWS organizations. You're able to add tags to your accounts, and then you're able to use those tags and the values of those tags in different other places in your templates as variables that are related to your accounts. So we have an organization.yaml file that allows us to manage the AWS organization resources as code. The next thing you might run across is tasks files. A task file describes different discrete units of deployments that will need to be deployed when my pipeline runs. And on the right side, you see there is a organization update task. This makes a lot of sense. This is the task that will ensure that my AWS organization looks like the organization specified in the template. And all the other tasks will take an implicit dependency on this task. There is a task that specifies an update text, which takes a template, and this could be a CloudFormation template or an org formation template. On line 12 and on line 14, we get to specify where this template is deployed to. And in this case, this template is deployed to every account within the build OU, with the exception of the management build account. These are references to the accounts in my organization.yaml file. I'm able to use different types of tasks to deploy to any number of accounts. So this what resource needs to deploy where can be applied to CDK projects, serverless projects, private types that then run in the CloudFormation templates or S3 objects. And then this task system also allows for other tasks files to be included. And it gives you handles to manage the concurrency of tasks and dependencies between these different tasks. This is where it gets really brainy. This is a template. This is not a CloudFormation template. This is an org-formation template, which means it's a CloudFormation template that has additional syntax. Now, any CloudFormation template is valid, and you don't have to add these additional attributes in for this to work. But this is one of the primitives based on which we built org-formation. So bear with me. This is a template that describes 3 resources. One, we describe a bucket. We describe a bucket policy, and we describe a CloudTrail resource. Now, on line 6, you see that the CloudTrail bucket has a organization binding to the logging account. Logging account comes from my organization.yaml file, and it's used in the substitute expression on line 10. So I've got a CloudTrail S3 bucket that will be deployed to my logging account. I've got a bucket policy that also needs to be deployed to my logging account. And now I have a CloudTrail resource that specifies on line 22 that it needs to be deployed everywhere. When org-formation executes or deploys this template, it will enumerate over all the different targets it has. And these are account and region combinations. And it will create a unique or a specific CloudFormation template for any of these accounts. Now, the logging account will get a CloudFormation template that contains 3 resources. Any other account will create or will get a CloudFormation template that has only 1 resource. And what you see on line 26 is something special. The CloudTrail resource that gets to be deployed to all the accounts has a reference to the CloudTrail S3 bucket that only goes into the logging account. Now, this would work in CloudFormation in the case of the logging account where all 3 resources are in the same CloudFormation file. But in all the other cases, what it will do is it will add the ARN of that CloudTrail S3 bucket to an export. It will generate a parameter to the CloudFormation file deployed to all the other accounts, and it will copy the value of that export into the parameter. So this will just work. This is probably one of the more complicated things of org-formation. You can probably stay away from this, as we now recently also added text templating syntax using probably more familiar constructs where you can generate different CloudFormation templates based on your organization context. But there's a lot of examples on how to do this for common problems, like Gratuity, CloudTrail, name it. Then a org-formation project. This is a reference project that we're hosting on GitHub. What you see on the left side will typically contain a number of different folders that solve different problems. Org build would set up the internal build infrastructure. Types would register all sorts of types to be able to do things that CloudFormation doesn't natively support, like setting some of the secure defaults or allowing you to manage service quotas. And typically, what I've seen is people use this to manage 40 to say 100 accounts, though I think it scales up pretty easily to multiples of 100. When deployed, a project like this could easily generate 500 different templates, or maybe up to 1,000. And because it has an internal hashing mechanism, it tries to figure out which of these templates or tasks need to be deployed and which don't, which means that even though this easily is 1,000 templates that you're generating for a single organization, deploys happen within typically 10 minutes. If you're deploying everything, obviously not, and this relies this in turn relies on CloudFormation's performance in doing the actual deployments. But just anecdotally scrolling through the list of deployments that we have in GitHub Actions, I found it's typically in between 1 and 10 minutes, and PR builds run, let's say, in between 3 and 8 minutes. And people use this to make continuous changes to the AWS infrastructure. And this is that's why it's important that deploys are fast and PRs are fast as well. Now, is org formation a landing zone? I think org formation, we started out with org formation before AWS landing zones was a thing. What org formation allows you to do is it allows you to manage your AWS organization as a whole using infrastructure as code. It can therefore also be used to provision a baseline of resources to any new account. If you remove the account, the resources will be deprovisioned. But more than anything, it allows you to continuously evolve and change the resources that you've deployed across your AWS organization. So at some point, you might start out with AWS config. At some point, you might want to choose a different tool in favor of AWS config. These are all changes that you can manage with org formation and apply to your organization. It's completely unopinionated. It's only until recently that we noticed that people really benefit from having reference architectures with best practices. But yeah, you could choose to either download the reference architecture project from GitHub, or start small and grow as you go. And the other thing important in its design is we never wanted it to require you to start greenfield. So if you have an existing AWS organization and you would like to start using org formation, you should be able to initialize, create a organization model based on what you currently have in AWS, and then start managing resources from them. Couple of things. As of December last year, we support delegating management to any account that is not a management account. So you can completely seal off your management accounts, and org formation will do its work from a different account. Working on packaging these best practices and reference architectures in zip files, and then with quite a bit of work, being able to deploy them over SAR. What I've seen people do, and something we do over at Steady internally as well, is we have multiple builds that chain each other. So parts of the cross-account architect or cross-account resources is owned by one team, another part by another team, and that works really well. Currently, we're building US Gov Cloud support, and there's a lot of example templates and help that you can get over at our Slack group. Join the movement. Feel welcome. Ask questions. Reach out. Try things. Create issues. PRs, stars, anything. Super happy to have more people use org formation.
Cool. Thanks, Olaf. That was a quick call. I think there is a lot of another few slides, but it suddenly ended. Actually,
another few slides now.
No worries. There were actually only a few questions. Only one question appeared at the end of the presentation. Does org formation currently work with Control Tower? If not, will it be in the future, or why or why not?
So it does not work with Control Tower, And I think the starting points that we took with org formation is different from the starting points that the control tower team took. We really wanted the entire organization to be managed using these declarative desired state models, and start with like a Git flow type of way of managing the AWS organization. I don't think control tower, but Matt, feel free to point out where I'm wrong, offers these types of integrations or this type of support. Apart from that, org formation is a tool, and it would allow you to use any AWS service that has CloudFormation support. So I think that then hopefully answered the question.
We can get some help from the expert on this field. Matt just said, maybe I can help answering the question. Matt,
Yeah, no,
go ahead.
I was just going to back up actually what Olaf was saying. I think, yes, the starting point was originally different. And today, it's something that Sunke mentioned as well. There is a degree of customization with the account factory, the account creation process with the customizations for control tower solution, but it's not, there aren't control tower APIs today, and there's not full CloudFormation based customization. So it would be, org formation is quite comprehensive, and I think Olaf, I think we agree on this today. It would be difficult to sort of fully integrate them. You could do parts, I imagine, but they're still pretty different today. But that is something we want to change. We do want to make control tower more extensible. So I guess I'll just say stay tuned. And Olaf and I already met earlier this week, so we'll continue to talk.
Let me see if there are a few new questions coming in. Let me put one on the screen. What types of validation can org formation CLI provide?
Great question. Out of the box, what it does, it of course validates all the different YAML files that you're using, and it does some rudimentary validation on how these files relate to each other. For CloudFormation, what it does, it will use the CloudFormation APIs to have the CloudFormation template that is generated being validated. What I think is most useful, and this is also part of our reference project, is org formation supports for a command that allows you to generate and print all the different CloudFormation files, so the outputs of this transpilation process to disk. And what people typically do is they do this as part of their PR builds and then run CFN-lint and CFN-guard on top of them. And to be honest, org formation as a tool is never going to be able to keep up with the amount of checks and validation that those open source tools build. So that's a great way to integrate those tools.
Oh, cool. I hear you mention CFN-lint. So actually, your org tool is supporting CFN-lint, or the other way around?
No, so what it does is the CLI allows you to generate all the CloudFormation templates, and that's what we do on PR builds. So those I don't know what's it for us, like 1,000, 1,500 CloudFormation templates that go to every specific region and account get printed out on disk, and then we use CFN-lint, and then CFN-lint actually helped us by making that go in parallel, because otherwise it took ages. But so yeah, the good people from CFN-lint kind of optimize the performance on that, and that works like a charm.
Cool. Another great question, I think, at least. Org formation also looks fantastic, so that's a compliment. But the next one, might one use it to manage AWS SSO alongside the accounts that are created? Yeah,
we certainly do. I know of others that do. We have I only had a short amount of time, but there's a custom CloudFormation types project that is part of the GitHub organization. These are types, CloudFormation types, resource provider types, so not custom resources. So you don't have lambdas and roles that you need to manage on top of them. But there's types in there that help you manage AWS SSO. in a way that has kept us sane over a steady. And I know a number of other companies that are really happy to use that.
Cool. I think we have time for 2 final questions. This one. Question for information: is there a guideline to migrate from existing AWS org setup with multiple stack sets to account types, sharing accounts, Teams accounts, etc.?
Let me see whether I understand the question well. So I understand the part about guidelines in adopting org formation if you already have an AWS organization. And the way that
if I would ask a different question, which might be related, if I already have set up every account in my organization, and I now want to use org formation to take that into account and create new things in the future, is that possible? Can I import, for example, things or?
Definitely. Org formation has a command, which is the init command. You can initialize one of those organization.yaml files, and it will copy all the SCPs and OUs and put all the relationships right, all the account tags it would put in there. And the idea is that after you import and you wouldn't touch the file, you update, it would become a no-op. It also has a command that allows you to do that init process and then set up an entire pipeline using AWS code pipeline and code build. And that creates a starting point to start adding your first templates, I think your second, I think your third. Then any template that you might manage using, well, stack sets are a bit difficult in a number of ways, but if you're using CloudFormation, and you make sure that those stack names match up, you can just have AWS or organization formation take over from whichever tool you used before. At any time, you can also stop using it. It doesn't deploy any resources to your AWS organization. There's only one bucket it requires. You can stop using it in favor of a different tool, and maybe then 3 months down the road, change your mind again if you wish.
Also, if you want to start using Control Tower, for example, is that have you seen that before? People doing that?
No.
Okay.
And I think there's like a different audience type of thing.
Yeah.
That maybe in the future I'd be super happy for Control Tower to be able to do all of these. And I'm super happy to help Matt and the other people there with insights that I've gathered. But at the moment, it kind of speaks to different audiences.
All right. Final question that we will take care of live. I see some other questions coming in, but hopefully you can check them on Twitch or YouTube after we finish this one. This question: how are cross-account org formation resource references implemented? Do you use SSM to store parameters, or are references resolved before rendering the final CloudFormation template?
Great question. Imagine having a template that does cross-account references, and it needs to be deployed to multiple accounts. What it does, it understands the dependency in between one template and the other. So the template that has is being referenced will execute first. The other templates will wait until the first template deploys successfully. Then, because we're pre-processing the CloudFormation template, we actually put an output in there. So we copy the expression that you would like to use in the other account. We copy that into an output. The output can then be read before executing the other templates. And the other templates have a parameter being generated for them. So then it just copies the output into the parameter.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I remember a couple of weeks ago when I approached you, you immediately started a conference call, and I was already in a conference call. So I will be very happy to invite you to the office and have a proper coffee, proper lunch, and catch up and get introduced. Thank you so much for your talk about the org formation. If you still have questions, please stick around for a couple of more minutes and ask them to Olaf. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yes. I scheduled a short break, but Matt is very excited to start. So we will not do a long break right now. We'll just dive into Matt's presentation. So he has, I think, 40 minutes scheduled for your talk, maybe a little bit more or less. Again, feel free to ask questions. I know Matt from also a couple of years ago. We met in New York when you were still part of the ambassador program. We had a meetup there.
Yeah.
Very cool. And you are probably already familiar with a lot of our viewers today because you run the View My Architecture, Watch My Architecture for a couple of years. So you're famous here in the Netherlands.
I don't know about that. Yeah, this is my architecture. That's actually now run by a guy named Kurt Zeckmeister. But yeah, I started that series a few years ago, and that was a lot of fun. It started with booking some studio time in San Francisco on my credit card, and it turned into a pretty big series. So it was sort of a video startup. But thanks for having me today.
Yeah, and you moved to a different role recently, last year, I guess.
Yeah, I've been with AWS for almost 9 years now, and I used to be in the partner team. So I know some of the partners who were talking today, for example, like Sunka and with the Superworker solution. I led the technical teams to the partner org, and then I was responsible for AWS Well Architected and AWS Solutions, actually the team that maintained the automated landing zone solution. And about, I guess, 9 months ago, I moved to a role where I'm now the general manager for Control Tower and for Service Catalog at AWS. So I moved officially into the engineering organization, even though I've been developing software at AWS for quite a few years.
Cool, thanks. I can't see your screen yet. I think you will have some slides for us.
Yeah, let me get that up here.
There they are. Bam. Yes. So take it away.
Great. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Like I said, my name is Matt Yanchishin. I've been with AWS for a long time. I'm based in New York City, but over the years, I've actually spent a lot of time in the Netherlands. In fact, when I started, there wasn't much of a New York office, and I used to regularly travel to the Netherlands, specifically to Utrecht, because to give work with Capgemini over there, because we didn't have many people over in Europe yet, and I'd spent a long time in Europe. I don't speak Dutch, but I did what I could. So anyway, I've been in New York now for 11 years, and like I said, for the last 8 months or so as the general manager for Control Tower. I thought today I was going to tell you about what I'm seeing from customers, and also share a little bit of history about why we built Control Tower, and specifically how we built it on top of the automated landing zone, or ALZ solution, and share a little bit about where we're going to take it from here. I have a dual screen up, so as questions come up, I'm sure Martin will share some, but I'm also happy to adjust in real time. We'll try to keep this a little bit fluid. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say, thank you to the builders. Olaf was just on talking about org formation. That's an amazing project, and Sunka was on talking about Superworker. And obviously, there are a lot of other landing zone solutions out there. Those are two of the bigger and better ones. ALZ, Automated Landing Zone, is another one. And I think those are great for so many reasons. Control Tower wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for these, builders and building teams developing these solutions. We really took the best of those and tried to build something, or a managed service for customers on top of them. But also, they push us. So I think we heard quite a few times, Olaf was just talking about how org formation sort of appeals to a different starting point, and provides you with a few more integration options than we have currently with Control Tower. And I love that, because it encourages me and encourages our team to continue to iterate on Control Tower and work backwards from our customers and make it better. So the theme of this year really is extensibility and customization, and that's really driven by all the builders out there building landing zone solutions or customizations on top of Control Tower or not. So keep it up, and we'll try to make Control Tower as best as we can. Before I go there, though, I just wanted to give a little bit of history. So, this slide seems pretty obvious, but it's actually a really hard problem, is that increasingly we're seeing not just software developers, but also operations teams, people responsible for Kubernetes clusters or any types of operations. They go by many names. In some companies, we call them IT pros. Some companies will have groups of DevOps people or operations engineers. Some companies will have their developers do everything. In all cases, though, we're seeing a trend where these teams are owning more and more. There used to be segmented teams, a central team stamping out templates, the developers writing code, another team doing testing, another team doing deployment, and this was all segmented, and that's starting to merge a little bit. So what's happening is we're trying to enable really developer innovation and giving developers more agility so you can push out releases more frequently. As more and more software companies move to software as a service, for example, it's really important to have a pipeline-based deployment system and to leverage GitOps if you can to deploy quickly. And the other thing that's happening in parallel, as you saw today, is people are not only writing code for traditional sort of coded applications, but also code for infrastructure. And they're using tools like CloudFormation and Terraform and other configuration languages to set up the infrastructure. And it's really part of the code. You see this expressed in many different ways. In the container space, it's really hard to separate the container and the application from the container cluster or orchestration system like Kubernetes that it's running on top of. And similarly, if you think of AWS as this collection of services, it's very difficult these days to separate the application, for example, that's using DynamoDB or RDS as its database layer. So we tend to treat these things together, sort of the application and the infrastructure. Additionally, there's now the environment to think of. Many people today we're already talking about accounts and how to manage AWS organizations and multiple accounts. So when you put all this stuff together, it gets a little bit hairy sometimes for companies. How do you enable developers to be agile? How do you enable them to not only be responsible and move quickly with their code, but also for the infrastructure? And how do you do that safely? If you're a company with thousands and thousands of developers and perhaps thousands of applications like we see at some of our larger customers, how do you govern all that? If everyone is using different patterns, if everyone is setting things up differently, if you're subject to regulatory controls, in Europe you have Schrems 2 is a new one, or in Germany you have C5, in Canada we have PBMM. There's all these regulations at the industry level and the regional level. And also corporate standards. How do you meet your corporate standards, your security standards, your regulatory standards, and at the same time move quickly? It's a really hard problem. So that's really the problem that I'm focused on with my service portfolio, which is Control Tower and Service Catalog, is enabling speed and agility and freeing people up while locking things up just enough so that it's safe and it complies with whatever standards, policies, regulatory regimes you need. So, this is a big problem for some big customers. This is just a random logo slide, but these are all public references of companies who are using one or more of the services in my portfolio today. So, this isn't just small teams and small companies experimenting. These are major multinational companies with very complex controls and policies that they need to map down to the code level and to the infrastructure level. And we're trying to build tools to help them. So all of these companies use either Control Tower or Service Catalog or a combination of both to meet their compliance needs. We shouldn't take for granted the notion of accounts. I put a link there, which is to our recently launched official AWS multi-account guidance. Until recently, there was actually a fierce debate about whether companies should deploy everything in one account or into multiple accounts. And to be honest, until recently, there were pros and cons of both approaches. Where we've come to, especially with the release and maturity of services like AWS organizations and more cross-account features in general across AWS services, is a multi-account model for most projects is usually a good idea because at AWS, the account boundary provides that logical separation, that isolation that you need. Earlier, someone mentioned, I think it was Sunka, mentioned separating. Oh no, it was Michelle mentioned, dev, test, prod, and segregating those in separate accounts. That's evolved into a best practice pattern now that we encourage. Striking that balance, though, between having the right number of accounts and too many accounts is something you need to think about. And this is where this guidance comes in handy. You don't want to have an account for every single teeny microservice, or you create an operational headache by having to manage tens of thousands of accounts. But you do want a system that has the right level of segregation, that segregates on the application level or perhaps the deployment stage level. And again, this guidance can help you. The bottom line is that AWS, the account boundary, is a useful isolation boundary and perimeter that you can use to segregate your applications in the right way. And we think about this a lot when we think about landing zones. So this pattern is relatively new. So a lot of the solutions that you're seeing, that's why they're new too, because the need to manage multiple accounts and the features and services you have to manage multiple accounts have all come out somewhere between 2016, 2017, and today, with the bulk coming in 2018 through 2021. So it's a pretty new space, which I think is why you're seeing a lot of interesting innovation and different types of landing zones. Organizations in AWS really underpins a lot of this. I think most of you probably know this service, but if you don't, you should get to know it. It provides not only an ability to group accounts together, but also the ability to apply account level policies, service control policies that govern at the OU, the organizational unit level and account level, what you can and cannot do to some degree. And the combination of these SCPs or service control policies and AWS config rules, what we would call preventative and detective controls, really give you a lot of flexibility that can lock down your environments just enough so that your teams can use them to the extent that they're allowed to from a regulatory or corporate standards perspective. A good example is at a lot of large companies, they require that S3 buckets be encrypted, for example. Or a lot of companies increasingly have a whitelist of services that can be used because they're approved for use under certain circumstances with certain tiers of apps. So you can use SCPs and other techniques to control how services are configured, what services are allowed to be used, etc. And they also provide that logical grouping of accounts so you can leverage that perimeter of the account and set things up in a way that makes sense for your business and your applications. And again, if you go back to that link that I shared earlier on the multi-account guidance, it gives you some prescriptive guidance on how to group those accounts together. So that's organizations, and most, if not all, of the majority of landing zone solutions that you see today. The underpinning technology, including with Control Tower, is one of the biggest parts of it is AWS organizations. So organizations is a cornerstone service of the landing zone, but as almost all of you will know, there is a whole bunch of services in the sort of loosely defined management and governance space on AWS. We have Control Tower, obviously, Service Catalog, but there's a lot more than that. CloudFormation for deploying and increasingly for helping to govern your environment. Marketplace for deploying third-party software. For example, you might have an observability solution like Datadog or New Relic or App Dynamics. You might have a cost management system like Apptio. You might have an APM system. You might have all sorts of things going on that are part of your overall portfolio of how you manage and govern your environment. And then, of course, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Config, Systems Manager. Increasingly, companies are using multiple services and often, most of the time, multiple third parties or multiple partner solutions as well. And so you put all these things together, you layer on top of a multi-account environment, and it's easy, right? So I think one of the reasons why you're seeing landing zone is because complex enterprises and big applications use a lot of services, and there's a good reason to use a lot of services because they each offer a different kind. Every company is different. Every application is different. Every regulatory regime is different. And you need to make things look a little differently. So we provide frameworks for sort of establishing a good baseline, but very often each company has to customize them to their needs. You heard Michelle talk about that earlier. So we try our best to make it easy on a service level, but when you're using multiple services across multiple accounts, across multiple organizational units in AWS organizations, it can get complicated. And this is why you see growing ops teams and cloud ops teams in companies. And so increasingly we're hearing from customers, well, how can I make this simpler? I want to use the value that all of these services provide. I want to use a multi-account model. I want to have the right level of governance. I want to have visibility over my controls. How can I do that? So, that's where Landing Zone came in. So it started with a few of our largest multinational companies. And they said, we want to work with your professional services organization and build a solution that helps us deploy all of these services in the multi-account setup, solutions that look a lot like OrgFormation today or Superworker. that set up config, that set up a CloudTrail, that set up alerting, that set up security hub, all these things that you need and that you can use to govern your environment effectively. So we did this, and that was in, I guess organizations came out in mid 2016. 2017, we started building more landing zones for customers. 2018, we released AWS Landing Zone, ALZ, and that was when the term landing zone really became used, at least more and more. And then in mid 2019, we came out with Control Tower, because what we heard from customers is that while ALZ is an amazing solution and they were very happy, and a lot of our more advanced customers are very happy using these landing zone solutions that they deploy themselves, they wanted something that AWS managed. There was a large subset of customers. In fact, we found the majority of customers who wanted AWS to manage the landing zone itself, because the landing zone management became operational overhead. Now, for some customers, that is welcome operational overhead, and it gives them the flexibility they need. But for a lot of customers, they want a little bit of flexibility, but they don't need all that flexibility, and they wanted something that just works. So that's where Control Tower came in. So Control Tower sets up an automated landing zone. It was actually built on ALZ with best practice blueprints. That means the landing zone template. We have a library of preset guardrails, which are config rules or AWS Organization Service Control Policies or SCPs. We set up CloudTrail. We set up config. Someone in the chat earlier asked about SSO. We also set up SSO. So you can give federated access to the accounts that Control Tower allows you to create. We set up organizations and the OUs. We do a bunch of this stuff that ALZ did before. And we also attach to a framework called Customizations for Control Tower that allows you to effectively customize the bootstrap process for new account creation. So for example, if you use Trend Micro or you have an additional set of compliance things that you need to set up at account creation time, Control Tower can automate that. So every time an account gets created, it gets bootstrapped with the right stuff, including third-party software. So that's what the partner is. We set up monitoring, we set up a log archive, and we use the multi-account model that I described earlier to do all this. So that's what Control Tower is. It's effectively automating across a number of different services rooted in organizations, but also config, CloudTrail, SSO, and a bunch of other things. And then it gives you a nice console to give you visibility for everything. And we launched that at Reinforce 2019. So it's still relatively new, but we're iterating pretty quickly. Now, 29 minutes is sort of the general baseline. It really depends on how many regions you're deployed in. We actually more than doubled our regional footprint in the last 6 months. We went from 5 regions to 5 regions to 13 regions. We're adding more regions, and because we use stack sets under the hood, just the way it works is it takes longer to deploy things the more customizations you have and the more regions there are. So we're working on better parallelization and optimization to performance. So the time it takes to deploy a landing zone varies in addition to the time it takes to deploy an account, depending on how much customization and how many regions you're in. But this is a lot shorter than the weeks it used to take to set it up manually. So we've really literally gone for most customers from weeks to, in most cases, less than an hour for setting up the landing zone and similar time frame for setting up accounts. So I mentioned customizations for Control Tower. This is a framework that is sort of part of the Control Tower ecosystem. It is managed and written by AWS. It's built by the same team who built ALZ. And yeah, you can think of this as a pipeline-driven account factory customization process. So when you go to create an account, you essentially use manifest files and a code pipeline-based pipeline system to check in these templates that get executed when an account gets created. When an account gets created, it throws a lifecycle event. We listen for that lifecycle event, and then we kick off a stack set-driven customization process at account creation time. So it allows you to really customize the accounts that Control Tower creates, which gives you a degree of flexibility. Now, this is really just V1 of customization and extensibility for Control Tower. We recognize that people want to customize much more than this, and it's definitely something we're working on. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out. So just a quick customer example, how are customers actually using this? I thought I'd pick a big one. This is the new data security unit within MasterCard. So obviously a lot of regulations in financial services. MasterCard is a very big brand, and new data security takes security very, very seriously. So they, like most other customers, started doing it themselves, and they moved to a multi-account model or multi-environment model with dev, prod, what they call cust. But they have very standard, like we would see at most companies. And what they started doing is then leveraging CloudFormation to essentially spawn stacks as needed, but then their library of CloudFormation and keeping track of how things get deployed by whom to where, quickly got kind of crazy. And so they adopted AWS SSO for federated, as their identity provider and to do federated access to the accounts. They started using Service Catalog to essentially control what types of CloudFormation templates and what types of sort of application units could be deployed. And then they used the AWS landing zone to normalize how their environments were being created. So, that was good. It normalized how things like guard duty and security hub and config and CloudTrail were getting set up. It gave them federated access, single sign-on, and Service Catalog gave them the ability to standardize who could deploy the templates, what the templates were used for, et cetera. So that helped them. But they found that the overhead of managing ALZ and SSO and all these other services was still considerable. So we worked with NuData and with MasterCard to get them to embrace Control Tower. And it's essentially, we talk a lot about undifferentiated heavy lifting at AWS, and this is really a success story where they were able to migrate from ALZ to Control Tower to really do much of the same thing. They're still leveraging config rules for detective controls. They're still leveraging AWS organizations for their OUs and for their accounts. They're still using SCPs, Service Control Policy, for preventative controls. But now it's all normalized with Control Tower to the AWS multi-account model. Control Tower also takes care of the single sign-on. And you can see it reduced human errors and just operational overhead considerably for them. So again, they use this multi-account pattern. So this is a real example of how NuData is doing it. I mentioned dev, test, prod, or in this case, dev, QA, prod. They also have shared services accounts, and they group accounts by business unit. This is why I wanted to show this. So you can see, for example, like data lake accounts. We see a lot of data science groups using Service Catalog, for example, to deploy analytics environments that are sort of prefabricated with things like Redshift and SageMaker, and with trusted access to data stored in S3, only the data you need for your research. So that's one example we see. The people who are doing the monitoring typically need read-only access to some stuff, but they don't need write to anything, and they don't need access to everything. So that'll be clustered, et cetera. So they segment in persona-based groups of accounts, in addition to stage-based sort of application accounts where they deploy their actual applications. So this is an approach we see over and over again at a lot of big customers. And again, policy is so important for all customers these days. It's really not an enterprise thing anymore, but it's particularly important for enterprises in the FinServ area. And so these are some examples of the ones they use. They use preventative guardrails with AWS organizations SCPs that prevent root access keys or accesses root, disallow SSH everywhere, no public S3 buckets. These are things, best practices that you probably want to do all the time in a production environment that they can rely on SCPs to enforce. They use tag policies as well. This is really important. Increasingly, tags are used for things like billing, so you can properly do chargebacks to the right business unit. And if things aren't tagged correctly, you can't do resource-based access control effectively. You can't do billing effectively. So tag policy is super important. So using tag policies has really helped them organize their environment, do billing better, et cetera. And then all the usual characters like SSO and CloudTrail and config, et cetera. With config is how they're doing. I mentioned there's preventative controls with SCPs and AWS organization, but config rules are super powerful for detective controls. So when you detect something has drifted from its desired state, and then you can, in some cases, employ auto remediations based on the issue that's been detected. You can either raise a ticket or you can attempt to remediate that issue. And customers take different approaches depending on their security posture and how they're organized. Usually a little bit of a mix of both. So I wanted to touch on quickly, and I think I still have a little bit of time, but it's one thing to set up your environment with Control Tower, but there's environment level controls, and then there's also sort of what I call application level controls. So it's fine to set up the environment into which your applications are deployed, but you also have to think about how the applications themselves are governed. We're seeing in the container space, a lot of people adopt OPA, Open Policy Agent, and what we've been seeing for years, and increasingly with a huge percentage of our top customers at AWS, is customers using Service Catalog actually to govern the pieces that they deploy into their landing zone. So if you look at a company like Bristol Myers Squibb, for example, they want to give the developers agility. So they say, okay, here are the standard pieces. Here's like the standard RESTful API. Here's the standard static website. You can do whatever you want around that, but this is sort of the approved baseline template, and they deliver that as a service catalog product. Before, everyone had to go into the console and get all the different services, got a little messy, and access control was very difficult. How do you give access to the right services with the right configurations? So that's what Service Catalog does. It effectively gives you a library of pre-approved templates that you can create centrally and in a hub and spoke model distribute out to your organization that take one or more AWS services and third-party software and apply rules to them. So think of them as anything that you can wrap in CloudFormation that you then apply a set of constraints to. We call this a product. So you can have a JSON or YAML or Terraform-based product, a collection of services and marketplace third-party software. You standardize it typically in a big company like a CCOE will create these standard templates, and think of them like application components. And then they can distribute them out to the end users in a hub and spoke model. And it takes a stack-based deployment. So you can deploy these application components. And we're working on integrating this much better with sort of more modern GitOps developer pipeline style deployment. So if you're in your IDE, you'll be able to see it sort of show up in type ahead as a service catalog product from your CCOE, for example. And then access is important. So it's one thing to have the templates that are grouped together so you control how services can be used by particular groups of users. So this is what portfolios are. So for example, you have a data science team. They need access to certain data in an S3 bucket, and they use EMR to run Spark, for example, or maybe they use SageMaker to train models against that data. You can wrap that environment up, give them access to S3 just to the data they need, and distribute that product out to the portfolio of data science users. And there's actually now services at AWS that do this. We recently launched SageMaker Studio and EMR Studio, both of which use Service Catalog under the hood to vend analytics environments, or other companies use it to vend networking components. So then you have environment level controls with Control Tower, and then application or lower level infrastructure controls with Service Catalog. Here is your standard VPC. Here is your standard data science toolkit, etc. And you have more of a comprehensive controls environment. The constraints is important. Who can launch it? What type of parameters can you use when you're launching it? Who gets notified when you launch something? And all these different constraints, there's tagging, all sorts of things that you can layer on top of billing. So you get better visibility into who is launching what, how they're using it, etc. And so the reason why I'm telling you all this is because when you're thinking about your landing zone, you also need to think about, okay, governance at the landing zone level, but how do I govern also what is being deployed into the landing zone? And you can use Service Catalog. I think it's great. I'm biased, but you can also use other technologies. You need to think of both parts, and also you need to think of the overhead, the operational overhead. Where are you going to invest? Are you going to build big operations team for your environment management and for your application management? Where are you going to use managed services? Where are you going to use it yourself? And these are the important questions to ask. And there's no one right answer. Every company is different. And this is a model that we see a lot of enterprises, but we'd love to work with you to figure out what's best for you. So just circling back to Control Tower real quick, when I think of what's next, or not when I think of, I guess I'm the GM, when I know of what's next, making it easier to automate. Control Tower was built very quickly. Like I said, I think ALZ went GA in mid-2018. We decided to build Control Tower a little bit after that, and we built it in just a few months, and it was launched in mid-2019. It was deliberately built initially as a console-only service, just to get something out the door and to meet the needs of the customers at first who wanted an easy button for a landing zone. And now we're adding more and more ability to automate in addition to the customization for Control Tower account factories. You're going to see that soon. Nested OU supports the ability to customize all sorts of things, and we'd love to hear your feedback on what you would like to customize. We want to make Control Tower into really a system upon which you can build your controls solution end to end. With more customer managed pieces, more guardrails that we build and ones that you build, working in tandem along with services like Service Catalog to provide the right level of controls that don't get in the way of your developers. That's my sort of MO, is free up the developers with the controls. They don't have to worry about the controls. They can worry about building software for customers, which is ultimately what's most important. So that was my rapid fire Control Tower plus Service Catalog. I saw a few questions come in, but hopefully that gives you some sort of insight into how we're thinking as a service and a little bit of history in terms of why we built the service.
Yeah, there was indeed some discussion going on about the API of Cloud Control Tower. But before we go into that, there was also a question where they compare to GCP and Azure. They have, of course, their own way of working with a enterprise account structure like Control Tower. Maybe not exactly this question. I put it on the screen because it was being asked, but maybe you can elaborate a bit why it's so difficult and time consuming to create this whole setup with multiple accounts, with all the structure.
Yeah, well, I guess I would challenge that it's not. I don't think it's more difficult. It's different approaches. Obviously AWS has been around for longer. We have every environment has its perimeters and its boundaries, and AWS has a few, but the one we're talking about today is the account, and that's typically what people use for the logical account or the sort of logical separation of the different parts of their application and environment. Historically, like I said, several years ago, most people were using single account, maybe a few. The companies using dozens or hundreds, or in rare cases, thousands of accounts is a relatively new development. Now in Google, I'm not a Google expert, but there's the concept of the project, and companies do have multiple projects, and there's some work to be done to string those projects together. Azure has its concept of blueprints. Control Tower is the only managed landing zone service or landing blueprint service, so that's actually sort of a leg up that we have. So we make it easier in that sense to deploy a multi-account environment. So I would say that different clouds have different approaches and different logical boundaries in how they express that. AWS, though, has a much richer portfolio of management governance services all up, and is the only one that I know of that has a managed landing zone or landing zone equivalent service. So I think the answer is really that it's different. It's not that it's harder. It's that if you're an AWS user and you want to take advantage of all of our management governance services, how do you need to make that easy? And that's what we're trying to solve with Control Tower. So it's they're really different perimeters and different logical boundaries, and like all things, you need to think about them differently.
Yeah, there's also one other legacy thing, I think. For example, that you still have to have a unique email address for an AWS account. We still hear some rumors that might disappear in the future, but is this something on the roadmap as well, or?
Oh, I can't. Accounts is another one of my colleagues, Caitlin, who's I can't speak for her and the roadmap there. But there's good reasons for some of the requirements for accounts. A lot of it comes down to billing. But if you are creating, say, sub-accounts, either with AWS organizations, once you already have a master account created, or if you're using Control Tower or Service Catalog Account Factory to create accounts, there are little simple tips or tricks. Even myself, when I create test environments, I use most email servers and services support the plus, so you can just put your email address or your email prefix plus account 1, account 2. So a lot of customers will do that. So yeah, there's a single email address per master account, but that's by design because the master account is your billing account, and we don't want to have multiple billing accounts because that's problematic. And so again, I wouldn't call it legacy. It's tied to very good reasons for these many large companies who are using AWS, who have very strict really billing requirements that we're working through. We're always looking to evolve how account creation works, and how we associate identities and humans with those accounts. That's always something we're looking to evolve. So, please keep the feedback coming. But with the millions of AWS customers and large enterprises with their billing constraints, that's an area where we do tread carefully. We want to do the right thing for our customers.
Yeah, maybe I also have to rephrase it a bit. I was meaning the root account. So the first thing I do is disabling the whole root account access, but you have to have a root account still when you create an account, and when you want to get rid of the account, you need to log on using the root account to delete itself. There are some solutions to automate that. I think Ian Mackay also created some code for it, which was used by several other projects as well. So,
yeah, it's been amazing to see the sort of innovation that people have built around it. I mean, listen, AWS Cloud has been around for a long time. It pioneered the the term cloud in the whole world, and the way that people are building the cloud, as you know, Martin, has changed so much. I mean, certainly since I started 9 years ago. Like I said, I'm based in New York, and so we used to go down to Wall Street 8, 9 years ago to talk to the big banks. It was a different story back then, and now we're welcomed into. In fact, today I have meetings with 2 senior executives from very, very large financial institutions, and the needs of those customers and how they're building is different from the smug mugs and the Netflixes and the people who really got started early and built amazing businesses in the early days of the cloud. So we're evolving, we're keeping up, but the AWS has changed a lot over the years.
Cool. Yeah, final question, because it's also related to the next speaker. When can we expect Control Tower APIs to become available so that we can automate it in infrastructure as code?
Well, anyone who knows AWS and who's ever spoken to an AWS employee will know that we're famous for giving this answer, which is, we work backwards from our customers, and we don't speculate on our roadmap. But let me just say that APIs is front of mind, and questions like this I'm getting every day about automation. We do have an API for account creation, and that's through Service Catalog in the Account Factory. But other things like guardrail management, these are top of mind for us, and we're listening. So stay tuned.
Thanks. All right. Are you online for a few more minutes? So if people still have questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So please use the chat. Matt will be there in Twitch and YouTube. I saw some other questions, so maybe you can chime in on those.
I will. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for being here. My next question will also be a little bit of a challenge, because he's sitting next to me, and if I enable his audio, we will have some kind of echo here. So let me put him on the screen. He's on mute, and I think we have to do it like the police does. I will say over and give it to you in a couple of seconds. So Kostas, maybe you should pause the video. Kostas showed me a couple of weeks ago the developments of a library he was working on to deploy Control Tower. So just in the previous session, we heard there are no APIs yet available, but we want to automate everything, and Kostas is not the only one. So he said, let me build this library because we can use it, and let me also open source it, and let me also talk on the Meetup. So, there you are, and the floor is yours. So I will go on mute, and then you can.
Cool. Okay. It's great to be here. The content is amazing. I have to say that I'm super excited with Superworker. My brain works very much like that, and I very much feel the automate everything and go a bit further than org formation, as Olaf said. So at the first part, I just want to present a video of the capabilities of some libraries, because the main thing that I was missing, and I think many of us are missing if I see the comments, is the API support of Control Tower. So with that in mind, and of course, I'm not so much into desired state. I'm more into thinking of life cycles, right? So for me, it's important to be able to start something, update something, and destroy something. So I will try to take you through a trip of what we can do with the libraries I wrote over Control Tower. And I very much like staying as close to the vendor's solution as possible. So I'm, again, like Sunke, more of a glue guy. So here goes. Oop, what happened there? Okay, cool. So here we just see the IAM. We just need an administrative role, and a small disclaimer: the video is ×2 on speed forward, because I want to spare you from all the waiting. Matt said that doing things was very fast, but I think he meant it in very big quotes. And I have also edited all the waiting times, because creating an account, for example, is 35 minutes. Deploying the landing zone is like 3 hours, possibly. So everything is going to go really fast. So bear with me. So using the library, we can actually deploy Control Tower to start the life cycle of Control Tower itself. We see that there is nothing deployed here, but still we can query the service a bit and see, for example, that it's not deployed. We can also check out the percentage of the deployment, which of course is 0 as expected. And if we try to see any of the capabilities of the library and try to do any active thing, the library will of course throw an exception that the Control Tower is not deployed. So looking at how to actually deploy it, we can look at the help of the deploy function that requires basically a login account and a security account. Everything else is defaulted according to latest best practices. So we can just use 2 emails, and I'm using the plus trick that Matt mentioned, of course. So with this very simple call, we can actually trigger the Control Tower deployment, and that starts our journey into using Control Tower. The time it takes is a bit longer because it needs to check that the emails are unique and have not been used anywhere else. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, but I can't really zoom in on the terminal anymore. So apologies for that. Now, the thing with Control Tower is that it's a uni-process thing. So basically, if anything happens, nothing else can happen or it is going to fail. So it exposes a flag of busy. So whenever something happens, basically Control Tower is busy. If you try to do anything active while Control Tower is busy, you will basically get an exception. So the way you can actually see when something is done is by just looping while it's busy, and when things are done, then you will just print out that things are done. This makes it a very nice target to be used on event-based things. And here we can see that even if you're using it from completely different processes, there is no local state. So everything is completely dynamic. So you can know when something is running and it will not break. So here we see that in 2 different terminals. While I'm waiting for Control Tower to deploy on the first one, I can see that things are busy on the second one, check out the percentage of the process. If I try to do anything active, it will actually not let me move forward, right? So if I don't check that it's busy and still try to, for example, get the enabled guardrails, it will raise an exception and not trigger something that will fail and will require manual cleanup. So we can just wait here and see the percentage complete. And of course, pro tip, always remember to import the libraries that you're using. It doesn't work without it. Fun thing looking at the back end of things is that you see that the process goes 4, 6, 9, 11, and then 100%. So our landing zone is now done. It still took like an hour or an hour and a half. And of course, now Control Tower is no longer busy. So let's see what we can see about it. We can get the status, which should be complete, whereas before was running. And seeing the percentage, of course, is 100% now. So this starts basically with deploying Control Tower. So we can go from 0 to Control Tower with a simple call. The information that we have, the Control Tower has the core accounts that have internal labels of primary logging and security. And these are the emails that I used just to see what we can do. Now, the thing is what we can do with Control Tower, right? So Control Tower is an interface over OUs and accounts, basically, for the most simple way. So we'll start with OUs because they're much quicker to interface with and play with. So all we need to do to create an organizational unit is basically just activate the call, and then we'll see that it starts and it's going to register. This is, again, the single process type of thing. So whenever something is running, you can't run anything else, and it will safely throw an exception. And when you create an OU under Control Tower, basically you get guardrails deployed, and it will not accept any other function in between. So if you try to create another OU, it will basically fail. and you will not get saved by the UI either. So we can just get that OU, query information about it, and of course completely delete it, which is much quicker. So the deletion is almost instantaneous. So how can we instrumentize this, right? Well, let's make 3, for example, and then delete them and see how that would work. Between any process, we just need to block for control tower being busy, of course, so we don't have issues. And we see that the process is first the OU gets created, it's unregistered, then it gets registered, and then the next one starts with the workflow, right? So this, of course, is just a library presenting the capabilities, and there's nothing stopping anybody from writing more high-level constructs like the org formation, for example, to use control tower in exactly the same way. Luckily, the deletion is much quicker. And the interesting thing looking at the back end is that you can provide capabilities that not even the front end can give you. So basically the way OUs work is that they are actually created first on the organization, and then control tower takes control of them underneath. So here we'll just create an organizational unit in organizations and see that control tower is basically blind for it. So it doesn't know it because it was created in organizations and not under itself. But what we can do is we can actually register an OU created, and then it will actually be taken under control tower because the guardrails are applied. And of course, we have the uni process here. So once, until the guardrails are completely applied, we cannot do anything active on the process again. But once it is done, we can actually use the OU as if it was created from control tower because it's under its control now. So of course we can delete it, and deleting it through control tower will actually clean up the OU in control tower, but also clean it up under organizations, as we'll see right now. So the OU is gone. Now, the important thing, of course, is the accounts, right? Because, well, yeah, OUs are important, but where we're really hurting is the account creation. And things work more or less the same way. So we can create an account by giving a name, an email, and an organizational unit under the account under which the account is going to be part of. So basically, this is as simple as creating an account under control tower. In this case, the organization, the OU exists already, so we return immediately because the OU is already there, and the account just starts getting created. You'll see that it's under the root organizational unit, and as soon as the account starts being created, it gets moved under the appropriate one. Now, what if the OU does not exist, which is one of the pain points, right? Because through Service Catalog, you can create accounts, but the OU needs to be there. If you specify an OU that does not exist, the OU will first be created, it will block until it's finished, and then it will trigger the creation of the account. So you can activate accounts, and you don't even have to care about the existence of OU because the library will take care of itself transparently. So here we see again that it's part of the root, and then it becomes part of the OU2. And we can query, of course, the control tower for the accounts that it knows and expose different information of the account. In this case, we can see the names and the demo account too that we just created is there. And we can also expose the emails. And we can see that the organizational unit is also exists. So this is, we created an account, but we also want to delete accounts, right? Because it's all about the life cycle. So deleting an account is basically from control tower, of course, alone is basically as simple as calling delete, in which case the account will be removed from control tower. It will be not under control tower's management anymore, So it will only be under the organization itself, and it will drop under the of the OU that it was part of, and it will be part of the root. In which case, then you need to move that account under a suspended OU with the appropriate SCP that locks everything down as best practices. I am very much looking forward for the time where accounts do have APIs for creation and deletion, although I will try to do something about that. So that's maybe something for Matt. So that was the account lifecycle, but Control Tower has its own life cycles, right? So we created it in the beginning, but ever so often we get new versions. So we need to also update Control Tower, and by extension, we also need to update all the accounts under Control Tower, which is kind of a drag if you have like a Nexus 168 accounts. So it would be great if we have an automated way of doing this, and this is basically what this is. So we can see the governed regions, and by having a small snippet of code that would block, making sure that nothing executes, trigger the update of Control Tower, again, wait for everything to finish. You can start imagining this as a step function, right? And Fred, a colleague of mine, Guilherme Ferreira, is actually making this into a step function that hopefully will be completely portable. But executing this thing will actually trigger the update of Control Tower, which we will see right now. And then in this specific case, I did have a small bug because AWS has been very busy on the back end. So by the time I tested this 2 weeks ago, they did change something. So the update of the account itself didn't go forward. But with the editing, it's not going to be clear. But once the account is also, once Control Tower is properly updated, all the accounts will actually be updated one by one. So if we call the get accounts with available updates, for example, we will just go over each account. In this specific demo, there's only one, but it would be the same if we have 150. The only problem we would have to solve in that case, of course, would be the life expectancy of the token used. So this is about updating Control Tower and its accounts, but completing the lifecycle means that we also need to destroy Control Tower. So we can also decommission a Control Tower, and that will actually make it completely go away. So looking at the status, we will see after we call decommission that the delete in progress is the current status, and the percentage will be, again, counting how further it has gone on the deletion process. And here I learned and I imported time when I needed it. So basically when that is done, we will have a completely clean state. What I did not try is to actually recommission Control Tower itself, because up until a couple of weeks ago, you needed to do a lot of manual processes to clean up. And also it was not possible to just decommission it without triggering a ticket for AWS. Now, apart from Control Tower, I have also automated the interfacing over billing because that is also something that is useful. And it works pretty much the same way. So you need an administrative role. You can import the billing, and then we can basically just do a few functions like see the currency, change it to euro, and change it back to US dollars. And yeah, since I'm in Europe, I will just leave it to euro. If you try to change it to a currency that does not exist, it will blow up. Other things that can be done is basically you can disable the credit sharing, which in this case is not under billing, but it is under preferences. So each group has its own namespacing under the library. So the credit sharing is true because it is enabled, but we can disable it by just making it to false. And we see that that works. And we can turn it back to disabled. And we can also trigger the receive PDF invoice by email in exactly the same way. These are small things that can be done. There are a few more, but these are a bit more targeted. I think that also Sunkyo is probably interested in some of these. And what we can also do is set the tax information. In this case, these are the information that we need to provide to the call. But again, it's on a different namespace, so it's under billing.tax. And this is a TRN status, so we won't see any difference. If you just use a normal deployed landing zone, then this will actually update the information if it is correct. If you provide a bogus VAT, of course, at some point you will get a rejection email after a point. Ask me how I know. But this can actually set the information. And the interesting thing is also that we can enable the tax inheritance. So these are things that are usually done just once. So maybe it's questionable whether an API is super important to have, but I think that it is. So we can actually set the tax inheritance. And the interesting thing with this is that it actually has a blocking period of 15 minutes. So you cannot update it unless the time has gone. So you see me being impatient here, not actually waiting for 15 minutes. So we get the exception mentioning the time. But after the time has gone by, we can turn it off again. And of course, toggling it again will take another 15 minutes. So this is not a fun game to play, but doing it once is fine. And that was my very quick demo, I think. Thanks. So, do we have any questions?
You can come over here.
Straight away.
I think we can go.
Okay, perfect. So what I wanted to speak about is that we covered a lot of the how, but we didn't really cover the what, right? So I can imagine that there are a lot of people trying to, seeing this meetup and getting a lot of info on tooling or opinionated solutions, but they don't really know what to do or why that is being done for their structure. So what I would like to discuss is basically the design that we have come up with in Schubert that we are using, and it has been quite successful, I think, in my opinion, and it's evolving. So it's more of a strategy of how you would actually want everything to look, and that will hopefully help some people answer some of the questions as to what do I build with all these tools and options. So what I would like to do is just cover a bit what the landing zone is. And basically what that is that you have a root account, and under the root account, the landing zone, according to AWS, is a control tower that sets up config. And of course, that also requires organizations, an SSO, and you have also a security service catalog. So basically, this is what a landing zone is. And once you deploy control tower, apart from the root account, you also get audit and logging account, right? And basically, this is what AWS landing zone is. And that's the default thing. And it's fine because AWS tries not to be too opinionated on how things should be set, because it's trying to cater for as many customers as possible, which makes perfect sense. Now, we as Schubert are very specialized on doing cloud migrations and cloud native things. So we have come up with patterns that work really well for us, and those are the patterns that I would like to discuss. So for me, a landing zone is not just this, but it's also the collection of all the foundation services and third-party services that are used, along with default configurations, security, compliance practices that you want to apply on your environment. So if this is the AWS landing zone, what we do in Schubert is that usually we also use Okta and Datadog, which both were mentioned as projects. I think that Matt mentioned Datadog, and Okta was mentioned as part of the Superworker from Sunken. So for us, these are kind of like things that, so even if we do use SSO, it actually uses Okta as a front end to get into one of these. Now, this is something that extends the services with third-party services, and it starts becoming a bit more opinionated landing zone based on specific requirements. Now, in Schubert, we have two big focal points. One is cloud-native, maybe smallish landing zones that are very targeted towards specific things. And in that case, the services that we use to extend is GitHub and Terraform Cloud to provide the namespaces for the workloads. And this is basically one version of our landing zone. And then we have the landing zone that is a bit more scalable, much bigger, for much bigger sizes, and it caters for completely different types of teams that do not do one single thing, like in this case, which is a bit like the landing zone that Michel explained. So the second version of the landing zone that we do, but wait, before I go to the second version, let's discuss about the boundaries, right? So AWS has the shared responsibility model. And the way that works is that they give you access to 220 services, and then you have to come up with all the ways that you want to use them. For me, a landing zone is what basically comes between AWS and the customer teams. And for us, this is the important stuff because the landing zone is workload oriented. So the point of a landing zone is to cater for developer teams. It's not to cater for the business in that sense, like account oriented business, but it's more to enable the business to give their teams the agility, speed, and isolation they require to deliver value for the business as quickly as possible. So if you don't have anything in between, what happens is that, as everybody before me said, is that the teams get taxed with either a lot of responsibility for security and compliancy, or they don't cater for it, so you have issues. So for me, where the landing zone lies is in this layer here, where you basically you extend the shared responsibility model with a small team of people that are knowledgeable and strong into the core concepts of what security, compliancy, and enablement mean. And then teams just get the output of the efforts of this team, where they can just use predefined pipelines to deliver their value as quickly as possible. So having explained that, the landing zone that we're designing and using as a scalable thing, which fits very well with the notion of Sunke and the Superworker, which I would love to see like combined, is basically extending the idea of AWS, where you have domain-specific accounts, right? These accounts are created to cater for domain-specific requirements for the business. So audit is where you would actually install your security hub and your guard duty and all your security tools, right? These go here. The logging account is basically used for auditability, right? Now, with that in mind, we have a networking account, and I saw that being asked a few times in the channel. And what we do in the networking account is basically we cater for the networking requirements of any workload. So what we do is that we have a network pattern that you can actually see under, because I noticed that I didn't put any links anywhere. So I'm pretty bad at marketing myself, but you should also have access to resources. So Schuberg, Phyllis, regional network. So here we have a regional network pattern where we design 9 VPCs. So we have a VPC for development, test, acceptance, and production. We have a services VPC, and these are peered. So services has access to everything. These are segregated. Now, if you ever have to do SAP, you will realize that you also need a full mesh network, which is not something that you would want to actually give access to any other thing. So here we have a fully meshed collection of VPCs where we would house special workloads like SAP, for example. And the services VPC needs to be peered. And of course, we need to have peering across same environments. Now, this is something that we would deploy in one region, and the way this would actually be interfaced with is by transit gateway here and an egress VPC, egress VPC. So this is basically the pattern that we can deploy across many regions, and by connecting different transit gateways of different regions, all in these accounts, we basically cater for the networking needs of any possible workload deployed in the landing zone. What that means is that when a workload lands, all they have is access to shared subnets of these VPCs, so they don't have to cater for any networking for themselves. They will end up in a best practice designed VPC in the environment that they chose according to the accounts that they will have based on their landing zone. Everything, all connectivity will be predefined, and all they have to do is manage their security groups for their connectivity, right? So all of that happens in here. Another opinionated domain-specific account that we have identified that we need is the image building account. So in the image building account, we create AMIs that are specific according to specifications of the organization, and any account created for the workloads can only be allowed through SCPs on the landing zone level to use AMIs created from this account, which means that no workload can use any AMI randomly. Only things that have been vetted and validated by a centralized team, for example, would be able to use those AMIs. So what we do here is that we kind of centralize what needs to be centralized and what makes sense to centralize, and decentralize all the things that could provide a lot of agility. So if I delete this, because you can see a much better version of this in the URL regional network under our GitHub. Basically what we do is that per workload, we create a collection of accounts based on their environment requirements. So you can have DTAP, either all of them or any of them or any combination of them. Each one of these will actually get access to the shared resources of that VPC for the same account. So when you land in here as a workload, you have anything you need, along with pipelines pre-created from our foundational services. So the first workload that we create in the landing zone is called a foundation service. And the foundation services basically are GitLab, AWX, Netbox, Vault, and Console. So these are the services that the landing zone basically owns, but they're still treated as a workload, which means that they still have their own environmental accounts, and the team that manages this. These foundational services provide pipelines, STS access to anything else on the pipeline, shared key value storage, and Ansible playbooks capability. So when you get a collection of accounts for your workload, you by definition have access to your own pipelines for GitLab, your own organization under AWX with your own teams per environment. You have your own Vault engines connected to these accounts automatically by the automation of the landing zone. And basically the only thing that a team would have to do is create their Terraform code under their GitLab pipelines, create their Ansible code and execute it in AWX. And anything will go through a pipeline as a resource in the account with the networking already solved. So we can go into many details of many different dimensions of this, but I would think that it's more interesting if there are any questions.
There was actually one question. Why use peering and not TGW route tables during the...
That's a very good question. So the reason why you would use peering is that in the picture that I designed before, you want to have automatic resolution of security groups cross workloads. So when you have a VPC and you have subnets and the subnets are shared, the way that works in the resource access manager is that basically there's the owner, and the owner is whoever created the networking account. So basically that's whoever built the landing zone. And then the people that have the resources in here are the users. Now, if you are user A and user B, these users, their resources are completely segregated on the AWS level. It's not like co-location. It's not like being in the same account and having to separate through tags. If you're using sharing, then you basically have no connectivity between resources. So in order for workload A to connect to a service of workload B, you would need to speak through SGs. And in order for you to resolve their shared subnet and resources, that is something that works through peering, and that's why you would use peering. If you didn't use peering, then you could not use SGs automatically, but you would have to use IPs, which would make it much more complex. So it is a bit complex, but if you go to this, which of course is unreadable, now I realize.
We shared it.
Huh?
We shared it.
Perfect.
As well.
Okay. So that repository does not only show the design, but it also provides a fully functional, fully automated end-to-end code base based on TerraGrant that can deploy all of that completely automated. So the peering is calculated automatically by the code. So there is no manual process to do any for anything. You just provide the different subnets per VPCs that you want to enable. And the code will just calculate what it requires, build the appropriate VPCs, do the peering automatically, so you don't have to care. So in the pod, in the connectivity underneath the transit gateway, we use peering because we save a hop, and we also have automatic SG translation. That's the answer to the question.
And Sally, Salty Sid is happy with your answer. So
you're welcome, Sally.
Thanks for answering.
Any other questions maybe that we can make a bit more targeted?
It's a really long one, so let me just read it and let me see if we can answer it. It's true that security groups cannot be referenced once traffic crosses a transit gateway. SGs can be referenced cross-account if you use a shared VPC. And shared VPC sharing participants can reference security group IDs of each other, including some links. So it's actually not a question. I think it's
the answer.
The answer.
Thank you very much for
including some
answer.
links. Yeah. Yeah. So that were the only questions as far as I can see. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And this one, awesome stuff, Kostas.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that if there are no specific answers, of course, we can be discussing for hours of any part of this, but yeah, I think it has been a long day for everybody, right? So as long as there's not a specific question, I think we can just call it a day. And of course, if there are any questions, you can reach out and we'll figure out a way to answer them. But this has been shared, right? The AWS API lib has been shared also?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, everything is open source. You can use and have fun. And yeah.
We actually had a buddy, Sunke, who shared all the links, and so it was easy
thank
to
you, Sunke.
put it on the screen.
Yeah, Sunke is amazing. And Superworker is better than sliced bread. I'm also looking forward for, if Matt is still on the call, I'm also looking forward for the time, as I said, that we have ephemeral accounts, so we can create and delete them without having to resort to tricks. And of course, when the libraries that I wrote are part of the Boto functionality. One thing I did want to mention, the AWS API lib has control tower and billing as I demoed, but there's also a component of SSO, which I didn't demo because it was written by a friend and colleagues, Shreyant and Kanra, which actually was very active on the Annexus project. But it is mostly superseded by Boto now because it has been supported by Boto. Not entirely, so our library still does a bit more things than what Boto does. So if anybody had a feeling that something is missing from Boto, have a look at the SSO implementation of Control Tower of AWS API Lib. Maybe you will find something that works for you there. And that's it from me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
cool.
Let's wave then and finish it up. Bye-bye.